Hey everybody, this is Jon Croft, and we're at Cultural Warfare with Jon Croft. How you doing? Rebecca's here, and we are talking about reviewing, talking about curation. We're talking about how to improve our culture through better reviewing and curation. Are you there?
Hello, I'm here. How
There
are
you
you?
are. Sorry about that. Sometimes I forget to turn my Bluetooth off.
Oh, no worries. I was trying to figure out mine as well.
Yeah. Those Bluetooth headsets are so convenient, but then you forget that they're on. So
Yeah.
they're just like on there in the background.
Yeah.
Um, so we're talking about improving our curation and reviewing in our culture, how to do that. Um, I haven't made a bunch of notes on this, but I did a small article on this, like, I don't know, like 10 years ago on my blog. This was like Liberty number 5 at blogspot.com or something like that.
Hmm.
I talked about basically how I review films.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't review films professionally, obviously. I'm a filmmaker. But what that does for me is it gives me a different view on film. It gives me a more understanding perspective on filmmakers and how films are made. Um, but I'm not always. The problem for me as a filmmaker is that, and the reason I don't do film reviews is because it takes me too long to analyze a film because
Mm. Yeah.
I get so deep into like thinking about the film that I can't basically I couldn't I would have to whip it into like a technique because I would be way too tempted to spend like hours analyzing the film. Um, and I think much of the talent that reviewers have is to do this very quickly. So they can just they get an impression about a film and then they can write for 2 hours and then they could just let it go. And so when I say I could write for 2 hours, I actually mean like a few days thinking about a film and then writing and then write and then think about it again and then write more and edit what I wrote and all this stuff. And that's I mean that more literally, like, because I like to really chew on films, and I think first impressions when you watch films is really important. But then I've found that it's not enough for me to give a concise review. So it's just my first impressions of a film, and then a lot of people can like distill a film really quickly, and so it's those people that I think are talented reviewers. I don't consider myself a talented reviewer. I think of myself as someone who could review films, but not someone who wants to because I want to be thinking about my own stories. I don't want to be thinking about other people's stories all the time.
Yeah.
And I also want to be very generous to fellow filmmakers.
Yeah.
So I think that my bias would get in the way a lot.
Yeah.
But I still think I could, and this is what I want to start engaging in with Medium Moses, because Medium Moses, the effort that Medium Moses has, and if you have listened to our previous episode 17, What is Medium Moses, I go into this in some detail, which is that Medium Moses is about cultural creation. And so the first step of cultural creation is a community has experiences, right? And then they have to filter those experiences. And that's basically like interpreting the experience you've had and learning from it, right? You're eliminating
Yeah.
things. That's what a filter does, right? It eliminates things it doesn't want, and then it keeps the things it wants. And so what you're eliminating is bad messaging, messaging that's not true. Like let's take the story of Job, right?
Yeah.
Job had a bad experience, right? And so the temptation for him is to filter that experience in an inaccurate way, or a fleshly way, or a human way that's weak and that's broken and that's maybe even resentful or bitter or things like this. And so he's going to use his filter then, if that's true, he's going to use his filter a little bit incorrectly and succumb to the temptation to like blame God for what happened, to kind of judge why his life was harmed in some way, and instead of to just stand back and say, I don't know why, right? And so we often do this in our own selves, right? We're doing this every day quite often. We're judging others, we're judging what happened in our experience in our lives. So in culture, we do that as a community, right? Not just as an individual, but as a community, we do that. And so we start to look around us and say, well, this happened because of that, and that happened because of that. And many of those judgments are incorrect. So that means that you've got a bad filter. So a good filter is kind of like distills the meaning of your experiences better. And also is not afraid of not judging what happened and why. So that's a good filter. So like a good filter can allow human suffering without punishing someone for it. Like that's a society that's highly advanced, right? Because in that society, for example, someone could be harmed. And there's many examples of this in history, but you could just say the examples that we see of superstition, for example, a superstitious society. Well, someone gets struck by lightning, and then you're like, oh, there's a curse, or this person was cursed in some way, or this person was bad in some way, so God got rid of them with lightning. Like, that's a bad filter, right? That's a bad interpretation of why lightning strikes some people and why it doesn't strike other people. So it's a bad interpretation of why these things happen to our communities. And so if you're a superstitious society, you have a bad filter, basically. And so you're judging things wrongly, right? And so what we want is an accurate filter. In other words, a way to judge people and judge situations fairly, justly, righteously, in truth, right? And not to use our filters in bad, incorrect, harmful ways.
Yeah.
So that's basically what curation is, right? When you curate, what you're doing is you're curating. The way it's used, right, is that someone makes a piece of art and then you curate that art and say if it's good or bad, right? But curation can also be on a communal level, right? Like judging almost anything, right? It could be about judging, artifacts in history, like how powerful or useful or influential this was in society. Any experience that a community has can be curated. And so, like, reviewers do this with films, right? This is the common example, and this is the example we're using tonight. But, like, there's filters, like, academia is a complex series of filters. Academia and schooling at all is a complex series of filters that are meant to benefit society directly, very directly. And it's imposed on children. So if that filter is not a good filter, and we're talking about hundreds of filters in an academic institution, and each of those are often represented by professors or by techniques taught, through textbooks and all these things, which is about how to interpret data, right? How to think about history, all of these things. And so, like, you go to any social studies type class, it's like littered with filters. So all these filters are how we judge society, how we judge things that happen to our culture and our communities. And so if these filters are not very good, if they're not very accurate or just or useful, it harms society, right? Because what you're doing is you're allowing the negative and the bad things in to your culture, but you're not allowing the good things in. And it's supposed to be topsy-turvy from that, right? So, in other words, Job had to learn to use a good filter, and that filter was to not judge God or even judge anyone for what happened to him. It was to accept that things happen in the heavenly realms that we don't understand, but we still have a mandate to follow God regardless of what happens to us. So that's a better filter, and that's the filter he learned to use when God taught him, to use the correct filter, basically.
Well, the first thing he said was, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. So it's like,
there you go. That's the
filter.
filter.
He was just setting the tone. He was setting the tone right there for just surrender and humility and just believing that God had the authority to do that.
Yep. 100%. And that's basically all these truisms and parables and like golden rule, these kinds of things are all very powerful filters. They're ways of being, ways of acting, ways of thinking, right? Little truisms. And so all of these things can kind of like affect our lives very deeply. And so that particular truism or rule that Job was using was basically a device to fix his filter. It was just like, here's the correct filter to view this situation. And so now you can look, you got some prismatic glasses, and now you're looking at things properly through that filter instead of improperly. So like They Live, right? The movie They Live, where they wear sunglasses and they can see now the world around them differently. That's like a filter. It's like a perspective. It changes your perspective on things. And so if your filter is properly calibrated, you're seeing life very differently. And when things happen to you, then you can actually react completely differently than if you did not have that filter working properly. So these are just examples of like why curation and reviewing is so important, because if you have a reviewer that's not getting the meat out of a film, and they're just getting like just the aesthetics around the edges, little things that they care about that aren't relevant to most viewers, or like just they had a feeling when they watched the film, and so they reviewed it highly, like they rated it highly because they got a good feeling from the film. That's not a good effective filter at all. Like it's not even a filter really, because you could feel differently tomorrow. So like you're not really using a filter. It could be because you ate a lot of popcorn and you felt happy. Like it could have nothing to do with the film at all. So like, so how you feel about something at the moment is just a very poor filter. So you have to use good thinking, clear thinking when you're reviewing films, and you kind of have to be in your element a little bit to where you're. You might need a notepad or something, but you have to break down a piece of art into elements, right? So, and then in all of those elements, you've got a ranking system, right? So every reviewer they tend to have a ranking system, and that's fine. But we'll get into why ranking systems can be problematic. And an example of that is Rotten Tomatoes, that's a problematic ranking system for many reasons. But the biggest, I guess I might as well get into it now because it's on my mind, but the biggest thing that I think is separates you from an okay reviewer to like an expert reviewer is ranking systems.
Yeah.
And it isn't the number system or letter system or whatever. That's irrelevant. What is relevant is that you're not ranking relativistically. You're ranking based on an objective understanding of what good filmmaking is. So these objective filmmaking standards don't change. It doesn't matter if we're talking about the 1920s or we're talking about the 2020s, right? So it's either objectively good filmmaking or not. And you can certainly give grace to the 1920s since they had technical limitations to how they could make films, right? In other words, don't expect the 1920s to have good visual effects. It's absurd, right? You could look at it instead as some other, like compare visual effects to like a visual art form like matte painting, right? And say, well, if I'm going to put this in the same category, now we've got something, right? Now you can judge a 1920s matte painting in comparison to a 2020s visual effect. So because similar kind of art happens there. It's not extremely similar, but it's probably the most similar between the two different decades of film. So now you've got something. But really what you have to do is you have to end up judging a 1920s film a little differently than a 2020s film because it's unfair to do otherwise. So essentially you have to move some things around in understanding, right, that film history has an impact on this. So the history of any art form has an impact, right? Technology has a major impact on art. It's probably the field in the world through world history that has been affected most by technology, period. Besides maybe military, like warfare stuff. So like the arts, the most enjoyable, relaxing, and then warfare. Like these are the two things that utilize technology probably the most. And they're always advancing in technology. So, even like food production, even though food production is probably more important than both of those, there's not, I don't think, as much innovation in food production, although there is quite a bit. But I would say that there's always something happening in the arts with technology, always something happening in these other fields, But like, so you do have to show some grace for that. And your understanding then for film history affects how well you review or curate film. And so a good reviewer does have to have knowledge of film history. And if they don't, then they're not really objectively rating their films very well. They're rating them very subjectively and relativistically. So what they end up doing then is comparing Citizen Kane to like a modern 1920s film and being like, seeing them very relativistically as opposed to objectively. Like you're imagining the greatest film ever made and then you're comparing these other films to that, right? So like an objective standard. And that is one good thing about like seeing the best films in the world, is that at least if you watch the best films in the world, you'll have a better understanding of what objectively great filmmaking looks like. So it's the closest thing you can come as it comes to actually seeing it with your own eyes, what an objectively perfect film might look like, right? So now you're starting to get somewhere as it comes to like how to, compare films to each other. And you're also understanding that you can't compare them as an apples to apples comparison all the time. You just can't do that. So these are important elements to reviewing well. Um, but you're also having to understand that reviewers have and curators have a purpose. Their job has a reason for being. And so that job isn't just for you to talk about films that you like. That's enjoyable, like that's fun. And that's really the only way I've really done it, personally. But like the real reason to do it is to understand your purpose as a filter in society. So in other words, you actually purposefully are understanding this is a good film for people to watch. And why is that? Why is it a good film? Or this is not a good film to watch. Why? Why is it not a good film to watch? And so you also get to understand that what kind of reviewer you are in that sense, because you might have a penchant for family films, right? Or you might have a penchant for animated films or for action films, right? And so then you can start to kind of like identify the fact that you're a certain kind of reviewer. You have a filter that's well calibrated to action movies or what have you. And so not only can this can be good for your career actually as a reviewer, but also it lets your reader, or your fans, like know what they're getting when they listen to you.
Yeah.
What to expect from you. A lot of reviewers they just try to pretend they can review everything equally. And then it just so happens as they just end up reviewing certain kinds of films. Well, why is that? Because that's the films they are good at or they enjoy. So, these are helpful things to understand when you're getting into reviewing, that you actually have a purpose, an important purpose to culture as a reviewer. And that's to actually improve your society by recommending content that is good for society. Right?
Yeah.
So this kind of lets you understand that you actually have a responsibility to society. So not only do filmmakers have a responsibility to make good art, right? But reviewers have a responsibility to curate good art. And so that means trying to improve society through your curation ability, very directly. So that's something really important to keep in mind. There's a lot of things, elements that good reviewers miss, or bad reviewers in some cases. Often they will focus on certain things, certain elements of films or art, and then ignore a bunch of other things. And why is this? Because there's so many elements to filmmaking. It's just scattered with like artistic elements and depth. Some of these things are on purpose and some of them are accidental, in a film. So keep in mind that these should still be noticed, even though some of them might be accidental or whatever. You should still notice them and recognize that they play into this whole purpose, right? All of these things could benefit the film in some way or detract from the real purpose of the film. So all these elements really need to be acknowledged. Like I'm my favorite kind of stuff personally is very like mature, mildly artsy, skirting on the edge of like pop culture stuff. Like I like stuff that's pop culture in the sense that like maybe it's appealing to all audiences, but I also like stuff that's like a little headier than that. Like it's a little bit intellectual, where a lot of the viewers aren't going to get it. They're not going to see it right away. Stuff like Christopher Nolan, right? Like Christopher Nolan puts out stuff that's visually arresting, like it's got characters that you are attracted to and interested in. He's got plots and stories that have engaging premises, like it's interesting stuff. and then you come out of the film and you're like, what did that even mean? Like, I really enjoy that because it gives you something to chew on, right? And it gives you even more to analyze after the film, and then you want to watch it again.
Yeah.
So I just think that it's kind of like these are like pop songs, right? Like, and pop songs can be very skillful, or they can be really like cardboard. They can be kind of, people like them, right? But then you're kind of like, it's like candy coated, right? It's like a little like the Barbie movie. It's like it's too candy coated. It's not very intellectual or smart, but people enjoy watching it because it's just very sweet and candy coated. But it's not a meal. Like, it's there's nothing like morally strong about it, or there's not like something intellectual to think about. There's nothing like that really. So I don't like those. I like the ones that give you more to think about, and it's little bit less candy. Like, sure, you've got to have some good tasting stuff there, but like a meal, right? Which, when I think of reviewers, by the way, I think of who's that guy's name, honey? Where I read his book. It's funny, I read his book and I don't remember his name. Oh,
Jeffrey Overstreet.
Jeff Overstreet. Yeah, I think of his book about review because he's a professional reviewer. I think he's like a professor at Seattle Pacific or something, and a Catholic. And he's got a great book about this, about reviewing, and he compares films to like a 4-course meal, and so it should be healthy, it should be good for you, but it should also be tasty and flavorful and have all these different elements to the meal, right? And so he says the problem in our society is we just aren't used to having 4-course meals anymore. Like, we're used to like Fruit Loops for breakfast. Like, this is what we're getting, And so, like children, we're like, oh, my cereal's not sugary enough. Like we're just little children running around, with sugar highs, like like, and that's how we are with our media, So instead of being like a sugar fiend and creating diabetes in our body. Instead, we should be learning what is healthy food, right? And in doing that, like in making good films that provide a meal, right? Now, when the reviewer comes to it, he's like, yes, this is exactly this is what my filter was made for, right? I'm going to filter this out, and it's going to be so great. So so when you're a reviewer, you're making, you're a filter. That's like you're consuming something, right? So you're consuming it, and it's coming through your body, and you're filtering the bad stuff out and identifying it, and you're letting the good stuff through, and that's good. It's giving your nutrition, right? And so you're enjoying this, and so a good reviewer is conscious of all these things. They have to be conscious of the effects that film has had on their body. And so then they have to be conscious of it, and then they have to communicate that to their fans and be like, well, this happened and this happened and this happened. So if they're a good filter, right, not only are they going to be communicating to others and in an understandable way, but they're actually going to be teaching solid principles through that filter. So they're identifying what a good meal is. They're saying, well, it had a good salad, and it had a good meat, and it had a good this and that, And so these are good reviewers. They're effective, they're thoughtful, they're fun, like they know what fun is, and they have a finger on the pulse of good filmmaking, and they have a finger on the pulse of the current society and what the current society needs right now. Right. And they're not going to just feed you they're not just going to give you sugary cereal just because you're a kid and you're crying, oh, I want my sugary cereal. No, they're going to be a parent to you and say, this is what you need. Like, I understand having a little bit of sugary cereal. Okay. But also have some of this, right? That's not that hard. So, like they need to be teaching, really providing an education to their viewer about what good filmmaking is.
Yeah.
And when they're not able to do that, then they're not actually using a good filter, and they're not providing a real service then to the community, which is what their job is, So these are very important elements. I mean, and people miss them a lot. What do you think?
Yeah. I like that connection of the meal.
Yeah.
A good movie being like a meal.
Babette's Feast.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's the example he used.
Yeah, I like, my filter when I look through a film is usually Christ. It's usually like, a character arc, a character that's been transformed, and a story that, that draws characters into situations where they're challenged, and
right.
And there's always something of, the one who laid down his life. There's always something of that in every story. It's not just as simple as good versus bad.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we do kind of like instinctively get excited about that because we're excited about Jesus overthrowing Satan.
Yeah. Justice.
But
we want justice.
It's even more than that. It's even more than just good versus evil. It's characters, being transformed.
Relatable, lovable characters who also care deeply and work hard to help others. Like these are very good characters, very relatable characters. They're like ways that we're striving to be like these people.
Yeah.
I think these days the problem with how our characters have developed is that the characters have become so relatable that they're not aspirational anymore. They've become so subjective, and so like people have reached the point, because at a certain point it was like the anti-hero, and then the villain became interesting to us, and the villain was just as prominent as the hero in many cases. Mm-hmm. And this often started in like the 70s, 60s, and 70s. And in the 80s we had a lot of like superhero kind of thinking, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, but there was always this element of like the anti-hero.
Yeah. Kind
of like I said Schwarzenegger. Well, like Terminator, right? Terminator is like an anti-hero. And they played with that trope. Like, is the hero a hero or not? They played with that a lot. And so, but things have gotten more and more and more subjective, and more like slice of life, small, relatable, to such a degree that the hero has to be bad in many ways, and also not as aspirational. Like they have to make lots of mistakes, and things like this. I like mistakes. I think mistakes are good because heroes also have to make mistakes. But then there has to be a story arc, right? That's what character arc is about, isn't it? It's about starting with mistakes, and kind of like Jonah, right? He starts with, I don't want to do what God says. And then eventually Nineveh is saved, even though Jonah wishes that it hadn't been. But God was teaching Jonah just as much as he was teaching Nineveh. That's a character arc. The villain gets taught and the hero gets taught as well. Yeah. Those are interesting characters. But there has to be like some teaching happening, right? There has to be like a real moral to it. Nineveh was doing bad and doing evil in the world, so they had to be corrected. And now we've reached the point where it's like, I don't know, is none of it wrong? Like we've gotten to this point where we're like, we don't even know what good and evil is anymore.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
we don't have any understanding. So if without good and evil, there is no character arc. It doesn't exist. A hero cannot improve. You know.
Yeah.
So it eliminates the basic elements of storytelling without good and evil. And that's kind of where we're at in many ways now.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about The Chosen a little bit.
Well, I was just thinking of that. When you said that, actually, I was thinking of the chosen, the disciples.
Yeah, yeah. Another great Bible story where the heroes are imperfect, you know? And you're never supposed to expect the apostles and disciples to be perfect people. Like, all of them, and even to this day, Christians, people who are skeptics of Christianity will attack the disciples and apostles, like, especially Paul. Paul gets a lot of attacks these days. And that's because Paul was about the church and how the church should behave. He was about that a lot. And he was interpreting an old Jewish way of being and translating that into a Gentile Jew conglomerate religion where we were together, and we didn't hate each other for being different. And so this is something that we even have trouble with today. Like we don't, and we've had problems with this through history of the church as well. Like, so like Martin Luther, for example, famously wasn't a fan of the Jews, like, and that's a problem. And so, like, throughout history, we've had these issues. And so the Christian church is not perfect. Like a lot of people, they expect this perfection. But, like, you can see the imperfection of the church in the New Testament. And so people like Paul are really necessary voices because his stuff speaks to today just as much as it did then. There's Christians today who still think we should, like, act like Jews, right? If you're a Gentile, and believe that, you should act like a Gentile if you're a Jew, and this is not what Paul said. No,
I'm glad that you mentioned that because I often forget this when I'm watching The Chosen.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of just there for Jesus to watch
yeah.
the amazing directing and acting that's going on, and the Jesus who, like, actually smiles.
Right, and has a lot of feelings.
Yes,
yeah.
And which is so refreshing. But but I found myself, we were watching, I think, the second episode of this 4th season.
Yeah, we saw it last night.
Yeah, and just being kind of like, I don't know, Jesus did something that was very interesting.
Yeah.
And then the camera just pans over to the disciples who are arguing about really, really nonsensical stuff.
Yeah.
Like their status in the kingdom and what they could compare it to.
Right.
And I was, like, momentarily, like, shocked. I was momentarily like, what? Like, how could they be talking about that?
Yeah.
It was just a reminder that that's ultimately what the show is about. It's about the believers, the followers of Jesus.
Yep.
The ones who are gathering around him because he's magnetic, because they're drawn to him.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they are not perfect by any means, and they're missing something. They're missing something.
They're missing a lot.
this is so true.
Yeah.
I mean, this is so relevant, and I'm not even trying to throw anyone under the bus at all. Like
Yeah.
this is like on a big
No,
scale,
we
on a
all
small
make the
scale.
mistake. Yeah.
There are plenty of opportunities for Christians to debate, and not even debate, but worry. You could even say worry about meaningless details that have no, just no relevance to
nothing.
their relationship with God, or to, the words that Jesus is saying.
Yeah.
And yet they'll still hyper focus on those kind of things, and even to the point of being nasty to each other.
Yeah.
Or just being cold to each other, or just feeling like they get it. Like this one disciple talking to another disciple, like, I get it clearly.
Yeah.
I understand what Jesus wants so much better than what you do, because I've kind of made it my own thing.
Yeah, one of the things I think that people miss about The Chosen, and it's actually a very subtle but very powerful factor about The Chosen and what makes it unique. People, and even the company themselves, when they talk about The Chosen, they say, "Oh, we're the first multi-season story about Christ," right? And so there has been like a mini series about Christ, but it was like not multi-season. So I guess the idea of that is that it's more expansive, right? It gets to tell more depth about the story of the Gospels, right? So it's really getting into a lot of depth, and that's really great. But then they say it's a story about Christ, right? And we think, well, yeah, it's a story. Actually, no. It's actually not a story. It's a story about the disciples. It's a story about the people surrounding Christ.
Yeah.
And how are they dealing with all of this? And this is something that people really miss. Like, they really don't understand that this is a story about, like, Peter and about all these other people.
Yeah.
And Christ is just kind of like, in a way, Christ is like, what they're doing just kind of bounces off Christ. And he gives them a lesson, and then you get to watch them and how they're dealing with this lesson.
Yeah.
So it's very relatable. Like, it's more relatable than any other Jesus story because of that. That's what we don't get. We think it's all about Jonathan Rumi or whatever. No, it's actually not. It's about the fact that these people are acting a certain way around Christ because he's Christ, and they're acting the way we act. Like, they're acting in selfish ways, in silly, myopic ways. Like, they're not acting like you would think that a bunch of followers of Christ should act. No, they're acting like little children half the time.
They're not behaving.
No, not at all. And
I
this is a real story. This is what really happened.
Yeah.
I
think this is the strength of the show too, is that the emphasis is not on Christ, although the way he's written and directed and acted is amazing, but the emphasis is really on the disciples, the chosen ones, the people that choose to follow him, and they're because we all have a story. Like, you don't have to spend much time near Christ to suddenly have a testimony of something that he did, some way that he changed your heart or your perspective or something. So there's constant stories unfolding just all around him, and these characters' lives as they, are just changed by him. And so it's really brilliant.
It really is. And that subtle difference makes all the difference. That subtle, like, pivot, that it's actually not all about Christ. It's not all about all Jonathan Rumi is not on the screen all the time. Like, some episodes, it's barely, like, maybe 2 scenes with him, and the rest of them are all the disciples. And the funny thing is I'm glad that they don't advertise it that way, because I think a lot of people wouldn't watch it as much or be as attracted to it, because we're all attracted to Christ, right? And so when they get there, it's like, oh, I didn't expect that, right? But that's because the show is actually not about Christ. It's about these other people who are just dealing with what is it like around a perfect person like Jesus? So
Yeah, the response to
yeah,
him,
yeah,
which is like honestly the like one of the most interesting things in the world. You know, like I was just reading
yeah,
Hebrews, and I believe it's chapter 11, and it just lists off all of these, you know, saints and heroes of the faith, and
yeah.
all the things that they experienced,
Mm-hmm.
and how their faith in God and in seeing the Anointed One was what allowed them to endure
Mm.
all the things
Yeah.
they experienced.
Right.
And in some cases, their faith allowed them to be rescued, and in other cases, their faith allowed them to suffer
Mm.
without denying God.
Right.
And and in this, you know, in this show, like, I don't know, there's just nothing more interesting to me than we all love testimonies as Christians. I think
Yeah.
that's something you can always get another Christian to click on, like, hey, you got to listen to this testimony. Like,
Yeah.
most Christians will be like, you know what, I really could use a testimony right now. I'm going to listen to that.
Mm.
You know, they might even be quicker to listen to that than to sit down and read their Bible or listen to a worship song.
Yeah.
But it's the story, you know, of God living his life through us. It's a story of
Yeah.
God rescuing us moment by moment. And yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about doubting Thomas. I can't stop thinking about, is that going to be the Thomas?
Oh man. Yeah, I can't even. I was thinking about that last night actually after watching it. I was thinking about.
Yeah.
I was literally thinking about that actor putting his hand
Yeah.
in the side of Jesus.
Whoa.
Like wow, I can't even imagine. Like that's
Yeah.
going to be mind-blowing. But like one of the things I love what you were just saying about testimonies and how engaging they are and how relatable they are.
Yeah.
Think about this. Testimonies are the science of the gospel
Oh, wow. That's cool.
because science is it's like a testable thing, right? Like you're testing what is the result of Christ in your life or in someone else's life, right? So like with any scientific examination, right? Any science, like, you know, you come up with a hypothesis, right? And then you test this theory, like, well, does Christ change a life, right? And so then, then you actually have a person. A person meets Christ. What happens, right? So this is science. This is like the science of the gospel. It's like real evidence, right? You can't just
Yeah.
ignore all these people and what they say. Of course, people try. People, you know, skeptics, atheists, many of them they have really good, like the horse blinders, you know, like they got these horse blinders. They want certain kinds of data, but they don't want other data. Like they'll listen to like material data, but they won't listen to someone give a testimony. So it's like, well, that's whatever their impression, but it's not real, like, right? So this is not
Yeah.
my perspective on that was always like, no, you guys are dismissing the most important kind of data. The most important kind of data is the effects that something has on the human being. And if it benefits your life or if it does not benefit your life.
Yeah.
And so you use something, you eat food, you do all these things based on if it improves your life. Not based on some kind of scientific metric that you think should be valuable. No. It's based on if it actually benefits your life in a real, tangible way.
Yeah.
This is just not disputable. Christ is improving your life. And he's
Yeah.
improving all these people's lives. And so it's just not disputable on that kind of scientific basis, right? And so like
Right.
we love this tactile, physical study, right? Like, well, what was it like? You know? Like, and it's true. And there's nothing wrong with seeking that kind of evidence. That's what we do as Christians, right? We have to live out our faith. So when you do that, And sure, you're going to have doubts. There's nothing wrong with doubts, right? And then, but you have to live it out, right? And so you live it out, and then you're like, what was the result of that? What was the result of following Christ? You know, and you know, like if you were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego back in the day, and you were like, well, what was the result of being thrown into the furnace? What was that like? Well, I was with Christ, so I was fine. I didn't get singed at all. It wasn't even hot. You know, like, and what about you? You know, so, you know, there's a real tangible difference there. You know, I know we're off the subject a little bit because we tend to make it about church, but like, the Chosen is a very effective story for this because, and these are the elements you have to think about, right? When you're reviewing something, is you think about these subtle differences between the Chosen and a lot of other Jesus stories. Right? So you have to break down all these elements. And story elements are some of the most important elements to break down because it has a great effect on the viewer, right? So like it's like editing, right? There's a series of scenes and they're cut in a certain order. And the order of the way it's cut affects the way you see that scene massively. So the order of all of that affects the scene. And so the same thing is true for story elements like what we just mentioned with The Chosen, the fact that it's about the disciples as opposed to just about Christ, really changes the relatability of this story compared to, like, let's say, The Passion of the Christ or one of these other stories about Christ, right, which really is about Christ. It changes it immensely.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is just that it's different, right? It's a different angle. So that's really what we want, is we want angle, like stories can be retold, but they have to be a little bit different, a little bit, give it a zinger, like make it a little bit different, and you're going to get a different perspective now on the gospel story. And that's what they did,
Yeah, so we get to see, absolutely. So we get to see how the gospel affects different people.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
And that's just so interesting, because you can easily get this kind of mindset that we're all supposed to be like these perfect little robots. Even when you have a beautiful relationship with Jesus, when you find yourself in church or you find yourself watching a Jesus movie, it sometimes feels like this very rigid set of rules. But then a show like the Chosen, where we get to see the personal experiences that people are having.
Yeah.
You realize how much God treasures the personal experience of Him.
Yep.
And how powerful that is. I mean, I think He loves it. He loves our own unique understanding of Him.
Mm-hmm.
To where we're not just trying to be man pleasers,
right?
But we're literally trying to walk out our faith, in the way that we have been taught and the way that we believe the Lord is showing us. Like, I think He's just so pleased with the personalization of the gospel.
Yeah.
And I'm really blessed when I see other people. Like, that's a big thing for me, is when I hear worship musicians, creating these songs about just their feelings for God.
Yeah.
And like they're like worshiping God, and they have this revelation of their love for Him, and that's powerful to me. Because it came from John Mark Pantana instead of Mark Barlow, and they would both have a different experience.
You mean it's like a testimony, right? It's like a testimony. Yeah.
It really is. It's like a testimony of worship. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of people would say, "Oh, that's not like the way it normally is. That's not the way worship music used to be. That's not the way blah blah blah," right?
Mm.
Like that's true, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
Just like The Chosen is also about the disciples, and this new worship music is about your own testimony. It's a change, isn't it? It's a twist to the same story. So that's how art works, right? Is it's the same story, but it's a twist to it, right? So instead of it being like who is Christ, like there's nothing wrong with that element. That's a very powerful. That's the most important element, right? Who is Christ? But we've done that. Like we've been there and done that. Now we want to see what's the effect that this
Mm.
Christ has on you and has on me. And
That's
so
good.
there's nothing wrong with that. Like that's part of the gospel, right? So, you know, um, go for it. Like I like it. I think it's good.
Yeah.
So like let's talk about how we want to improve reviewing and curating. My belief that the is that in the mission of Media Moses, we have as part of our mission to inspire a new group of curators to analyze art and analyze culture in a more accurate or skillful or professional way. So what I want to do is write some more specific guidelines for how to do that. And so that's called the shepherd's staff. That's what I'm going to be writing after I write the Moses We Need. And the shepherd's staff is like a detailed, it's like a detailed account of what happened with Moses in the desert. And the point of that is to understand that this is what we're going to be having to do in our culture to really do culture creation, is do what the Israelites did in the desert. And so we're going to be going through a lot of trials and difficulty, and we're going to be tempted to turn away from God, and we're going to be tempted to go back to Egypt, right, and do things the way the Egyptians did it. And so these are temptations. Well, the shepherd is not just Moses, right? It's God. So God has a shepherd's staff, and that staff is a staff of correction. And that correction also pulls you out of your pit, right? So if you're a sheep and you're stuck in a pit, that pole, that staff, goes around your neck and pulls you up out of that. And you don't like that very much. That kind of hurts. It's a staff of correction, but it also saves you. It saves you from getting stuck. It saves you from dying, right? So that's what the staff of correction is. So the shepherd's staff is a staff of correction. It tells you what you should be doing. Instead of acting like Egypt, you need to be acting like your new culture. So what is that? So you have to think about what benefits society, what benefits our community. And you can't just be thinking about yourself and your own enjoyment. You have to be thinking about your children and your community and the effects this has on them, right? So that's what the book will be about. And what it's really about is creating good filters, right? So that's the book about filters. And, you know, the Moses We Need to me is just about my story and about what got me here to this point to make Media Moses, and kind of the overview of what that is, what Media Moses is. And then, you know, a little bit of my story. And then the shepherd's staff is a story about how we're going to have to recreate our culture. And so, and we're using the story of the Exodus as an example. And then we talk about how to rebuild your filters. And then after that is something else we'll talk about. We'll get there when we get closer. But like for right now, the shepherd's staff is the project that I have to talk about how to review better, how to curate better, like following the guidelines in the Bible to make our filters better, right?
Wow.
So, I plan on that being very helpful. I mean, hopefully it'll be very helpful for people, because I can't say all this stuff here. I mean, a lot of this stuff I just can't say in an hour, podcast. It's in depth, and there's scriptures to back all of it up. And so I will be, writing that, but I have to get through this book first. But what I wanted to do was let you guys know that, even though I don't make reviews, and even though I don't consider myself a professional reviewer, I believe that what we're doing here has a deep, abiding, meaningful purpose as it comes to how to improve our culture through things like improving the way we curate art. Like, that's very important. And so, like for example, like, just as a parent, right? We're parents now, honey. We have to curate all of our children's art. We have to curate all the stuff they watch, all the stuff they do. And that's what all of us have to be doing in our society. If we're not doing that, right? Like, what kind of food are we eating? Are we eating poison? You know what I'm saying? So we have to really think about that. And, we also could work on our food system literally in our country to where we stop eating poison. But that's another matter. Stop eating seed oils, children. It's bad for you. So that's my introduction to to the shepherd staff and to all this stuff. And but what do you think about that? Like, I hadn't even told you I was going to do that, honey.
That's cool. That's really cool.
Thank you. Well, that's the plan, like, I mean, and here's the thing is, I actually believe that if the Lord blesses this, I think this could substitute Rotten Tomatoes. Because it's not meant to be just a book that you buy and learn from. It's meant to create a system, right, where we can then participate in that system and better interpret film as a result.
Yeah.
Not just to provide, not just so many tomatoes, so is it rotten? No. Much more nuanced, much more like realistic. Like, how are you actually going to understand this film as a good film or bad film? Some films adults should be watching. Some, if you're a kid, like, so how are you going to do? Like, this is very nuanced. It's much more nuanced than people like to think. Like, and so, like, because you have to think of a very diverse, unique society. As a Christian, you understand this as the weak in faith and the strong in faith. Right? So we have these metrics in the faith, but a lot of people don't understand these things, and they don't apply them. And they don't understand that this is not going to be blessed, right? And it's not going to bless your culture when you just do whatever is just fun. When you eat Fruit Loops all day, it's not going to be good for your culture. So, like, why are we not applying these obvious rules to our media?
Yeah.
So, and it's not about making life hard for you. We still want things to be fun. Like, I don't like most faith-based film. Like, don't get me wrong. No. Like, I'm still a fan of, like, Star Wars and a lot of these other things. Not the current Star Wars, but, like, I'm a fan of good entertainment, right?
Yeah.
But it also cannot provide you with a bunch of poison, like false things that are bad for you and bad for your children to watch. Like, this is not everything is appropriate for children to watch. That's ridiculous. Yeah. It's bad for them. To see certain imagery that's harmful or that's, tragic and damaging, like that's not good for the mind of a child.
Yeah.
So, and adults can often be like children. We can be in a fragile state. Like sometimes we feel depressed. And so understanding and knowing these things helps you to navigate through a lot of this stuff, these troubling things, And storytelling can be used as a device to actually help you heal through different difficult things, difficult moments. And when you don't use these things properly, it can actually hurt you, right? And hurt whether it's just your psyche or whether it's your perspective about the world, your view of the world, or your view of God and who God is. All of these things can be very impactful, You might need a lot of positivity in your life. And a lot of people actually do. A lot of people need a lot of positivity, the can-do attitude. They need stuff like that. They end up watching things like action movies and things that like energize them, or like romance. They want to see the hope, right, in that. And so like these are important things to note. Are the romance movies really giving you hope, or are they just giving you a false hope, which really isn't that helpful, So all of these things are really important to understand, to use these filters properly so that you're actually able to navigate media better. So that's what we plan to do. It's a very nuanced thing. That's why it requires a book.
Yeah.
You see? So it's a very nuanced thing. And my hope is that people who want to be future curators, future reviewers, my hope is that those are the people who will read it, because those are the people who need to understand that our society needs a change, right? And so they can be part of this change. That's the kind of stuff I hope that this book could do. I mean, God willing, that would be incredible.
Yes.
Well, anyway, we'll wrap it up, but we love you guys. We hope that you get a lot out of these talks, and we hope that this is going to be beneficial to you when you listen to it and watch it. I don't want to say it. Like, subscribe, and comment. Oh, I did it.
You're supposed to say it. It's good. You said it. It's fine. It's better if you say it than not say it.
As long as you say it. Yeah.
Good job. You did what you're supposed to do.
But honey, if I don't tell them to do it, then they won't do it. They don't know these things going into YouTube. It's the first time they've ever been on YouTube, ever. I have to tell them. I have to remind them. Anyway, love you guys. And where can people find you, Rebecca?
Oh, that's sweet of you. I am Rebecca Loves Jesus on YouTube and Facebook, and on Instagram it's Jesus Loves Rebecca. And where can people find more about you, Jon Croft?
Oh, thank you. Well, I am here on X as Jon Edward Croft. I'm also on YouTube as Jon Edward Croft and as Cultural Warfare with Jon Croft. I'm on Rumble as Cultural Warfare with Jon Croft. You can find my writing on MediaMoses.com, and Cultural Warfare on Locals as well. So thank you for showing up. Love you guys, and we'll talk to you next week.